My hands were shaking as I stared at the piece of paper Tommy had just slipped across the dinner table. The words were written in his messy, 8-year-old handwriting, but they hit me like a punch to the stomach. "Don't eat the cake Dad made. Come to my room." I looked up at my son, and the fear in his brown eyes made my blood turn cold. Tommy wasn't the type of kid to play pranks or make up stories. He was serious, careful, the kind of child who thought before he spoke. And right now he looked terrified. "Sarah, honey, you look pale." David's voice came from the kitchen, warm and caring like always. "Are you feeling all right? Maybe some cake will help boost your energy." I forced a smile and called back, "Just tired from work. I'll be right there." The beautiful chocolate cake sat in the center of our dining table like a masterpiece. 3 layers of rich, dark chocolate with perfect swirls of buttercream frosting. David had spent hours making it, humming happily in the kitchen while I dozed on the couch. I'd been so tired lately, more tired than I'd ever been in my life. "Everything okay, buddy?" I whispered to Tommy, trying to keep my voice normal. He shook his head quickly, his eyes darting toward the kitchen where we could hear David washing dishes. Tommy grabbed my hand under the table, his small fingers ice cold. "Mom, please," he mouthed silently. David walked back into the dining room, drying his hands on a kitchen towel. His smile was bright and loving, the same smile that had made me fall for him 8 months ago. The same smile I'd trusted with my heart, my home, and my son's future. "Who's ready for the best chocolate cake in the world?" he announced, picking up the cake knife. "Sarah, I made this especially for you. Extra sweet, just how you like it." But I didn't like extra sweet things. I never had. How could he not know that after all this time? "Actually," I said, standing up slowly, "I need to help Tommy with something upstairs first. We'll be right back down." David's smile flickered for just a second. "Can't it wait? The cake is perfect right now, and I worked so hard on it." There was something in his voice, something that made the hair on my arms stand up. A hint of annoyance, maybe even anger, hidden under his usual gentle tone. "Just 5 minutes," I promised, taking Tommy's hand. As we walked toward the stairs, I felt David's eyes following us. Tommy squeezed my hand tighter with each step, and by the time we reached his bedroom, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Tommy closed his door quietly and turned to face me. Tears were streaming down his cheeks. "Mom, he's been putting stuff in your food," he whispered, his voice shaking. "I've been watching him. When you're sleeping or when you go to the bathroom, he puts white powder in your drinks and your soup." The room started spinning around me. "What are you talking about, sweetheart?" Tommy ran to his closet and pulled out his backpack. From inside, he took out a small plastic bag. Inside was a white powder and a prescription bottle with no label. "I found this in his jacket pocket yesterday," Tommy said. "And there's more stuff hidden in the garage. Mom, I think he's trying to make you sick." I stared at the bag, my mind racing. All those doctor visits, all those tests that came back normal, all those nights I'd fallen asleep right after David brought me my special bedtime tea to help with my headaches. If you think David is definitely up to something suspicious, let me know in the comments. And if you think there might be an innocent explanation for all of this, tell me what you think it could be. Your theories help me know what direction you want this story to go. "Sarah!" David's voice called from downstairs, louder now. "The cake is getting cold. Come on down." But I couldn't move, because looking at my son's terrified face and holding that bag of mysterious powder, I realized that the man I'd fallen in love with, the man I'd trusted with everything, might be slowly killing me. And if Tommy was right, tonight's cake might be my last meal. 8 months earlier, my life was completely different. I was a mess, honestly. Michael had been dead for 10 months, and I was still wearing his old t-shirts to bed and crying every time I had to make decisions about the business he'd built from nothing. The real estate company was thriving, but I felt like I was drowning in spreadsheets and client meetings and property inspections. Tommy was struggling too. He'd stopped talking about his dad, but I'd catch him sitting in Michael's old office, just staring at the family photos on the desk. My 8-year-old son was trying to be the man of the house, and it broke my heart every single day. That Tuesday morning at Morrison's grocery store changed everything. I was fumbling with my wallet, trying to pay for coffee and pastries for a client meeting, when someone bumped into me from behind. My hot coffee went flying, splashing all over my white blouse and favorite jacket. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." The voice was deep, genuinely upset. I wasn't watching where I was going. I turned around, ready to be annoyed, but stopped short. The man standing there was tall, with kind brown eyes and the most apologetic expression I'd ever seen. He was holding his own coffee cup and looking at me like he'd just ruined my entire life. "It's okay," I said, even though my jacket was definitely not okay. "No, it's not okay at all," he insisted. "Please, let me buy you a new coffee and maybe breakfast. It's the least I can do." I should have said no. I should have just taken my groceries and left. But there was something about his smile that made me feel warm for the first time in months. "I'm David," he said, extending his hand. "David Chen. And I promise I'm not usually this clumsy." "Sarah," I replied, shaking his hand. His grip was firm but gentle. "Sarah Mitchell." Something flickered in his eyes when I said my last name, but it happened so fast I thought I'd imagined it. We ended up at the little cafe next to the grocery store. David insisted on paying for dry cleaning my jacket and bought me the most expensive coffee on the menu. He asked about my work, and when I mentioned the real estate business, he seemed genuinely interested. "That must be incredibly stressful, especially running it on your own," he said, stirring sugar into his coffee. "How did you know I run it alone?" I asked. He paused for just a second. "You mentioned earlier that you were rushing to a client meeting. Most people who work for someone else don't stress about being late the same way business owners do." It made sense, but something about the way he said it felt rehearsed. "I'm a substitute teacher," he told me. "High school chemistry and biology. It's not glamorous, but I love working with kids." We talked for over an hour. He told me about growing up in Portland, moving here 2 years ago for a fresh start after some difficult times. He was vague about the details, but I understood difficult times. He asked about Tommy, and his face lit up when I showed him pictures. "He looks like a smart kid," David said. "I bet he misses having a father figure around." The comment made me uncomfortable, but his tone was so caring that I pushed the feeling away. Over the next few weeks, David seemed to show up everywhere: at the coffee shop where I grabbed my morning latte, at Tommy's school when I was picking him up, at the park where we went on weekends. Each time he acted surprised to see me, but his smile was always ready. "What are the chances?" he'd say, laughing. "We must be meant to keep running into each other." Our first official date was at Romano's, the nicest Italian restaurant in town. David had made reservations weeks in advance, he said, but his original plans had fallen through. Would I like to join him instead of letting the table go to waste? He was the perfect gentleman. He opened doors, pulled out my chair, and listened to everything I said like it was the most important thing in the world. When I mentioned how hard it was to manage the business alone, he nodded sympathetically. "You shouldn't have to carry all that weight by yourself," he said. "Michael sounds like he was an amazing man, but I'm sure he wouldn't want you to struggle." I'd never told him Michael's name. "I mentioned my husband's name?" I asked. David smiled smoothly. "Of course you did, Sarah, when we were talking about Tommy missing his father. Don't you remember?" I didn't remember, but lately my memory had been foggy. Stress, probably. 3 months into our relationship, David brought up the idea that would change everything. We were sitting on my back porch, watching Tommy play with his soccer ball in the yard. The sun was setting, painting the sky in beautiful orange and pink colors, and I felt more at peace than I had since Michael died. "Sarah," David said, reaching for my hand, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" I asked, leaning into his shoulder. "Well, you're working so hard, managing the business and taking care of Tommy all by yourself. And honestly, I hate going back to my empty apartment every night when I could be here helping you both. I pulled back to look at him. David, what are you saying? I'm saying maybe it's time I moved in, he said with that warm smile I'd grown to love. I could help with Tommy's homework, cook dinner so you don't have to worry about it after long work days. Take some of the pressure off you. My first instinct was to say it was too soon. Michael and I had dated for 2 years before we moved in together. But David wasn't Michael, and my situation was completely different now. I don't know, I said honestly. Tommy's still adjusting to having you around. Moving in might be a big step. David nodded like he understood completely. Of course, I get that. But think about it. Tommy needs a stable male figure in his life. And you, sweetheart, you're exhausting yourself trying to do everything alone. He gestured toward my son, who was now sitting in the grass, looking tired and small. Look at him, Sarah. He's carrying too much weight for an 8-year-old. He worries about you, I can see it. If I'm here more often, he can just be a kid again. The idea was tempting, I had to admit. Coming home to dinner already prepared, having someone to help with bedtime routines, not falling asleep alone every night. It all sounded wonderful. Plus, David added, I could help with some of the business expenses. My substitute teaching doesn't pay much, but every little bit helps, right? That was the moment that convinced me, not because I needed his money, but because he was offering to contribute. It showed me he was serious about building a life together, not just taking advantage of my situation. Okay, I said. Let's try it. David's face lit up like Christmas morning. Really? Really? But we take it slow with Tommy, okay? This is his home too. Absolutely, David agreed, kissing my forehead. We'll make this work, Sarah. I promise. The next weekend, David officially moved in. He didn't have much. A few boxes of clothes, some books, kitchen supplies, and a toolbox. For someone in his 30s, it seemed like very little. But he explained that he'd been living simply since his difficult period a few years back. I believe in fresh starts, he said as we unpacked his things. Sometimes you have to leave the past behind completely. David settled into our routine quickly. Too quickly, maybe. He took over grocery shopping, saying he enjoyed it, and it gave me more time to focus on work. He started cooking dinner most nights, always asking what Tommy and I were in the mood for. You're spoiling us, I told him one evening as he served homemade lasagna. That's the point, he replied, ruffling Tommy's hair. My 2 favorite people deserve to be spoiled. But I noticed Tommy wasn't eating much lately. When I asked him about it, he just shrugged and said he wasn't very hungry. David suggested maybe Tommy was going through a growth spurt, and his appetite would come back. Kids are weird about food sometimes, David said. When I was teaching full-time, I saw it all the time. They get picky, then suddenly they're eating everything in sight. It made sense, so I didn't worry too much about it. David also started taking over other household responsibilities. He did the laundry, cleaned the bathrooms, and even organized my home office. You don't have to do all this, I protested one day, finding him scrubbing the kitchen floor. I want to, he insisted. Sarah, you've been carrying the world on your shoulders for months. Let me help carry some of the weight. Around this time, I started getting headaches. Not terrible ones, but persistent, nagging pain that made it hard to concentrate during client meetings. I mentioned it to David, and he immediately went to the pharmacy to get me some strong pain relievers. Probably just stress, he said, handing me the bottle. Your body is finally relaxing now that you have help. Sometimes that causes headaches while you adjust. He was probably right. I'd been wound so tight for so long that my body probably didn't know how to handle not being constantly worried about everything. 2 months after David moved in, I should have been happier than I'd been since Michael died. David was everything I thought I wanted. Attentive, helpful, and completely devoted to Tommy and me. But something was wrong with my body, and it was getting worse every day. The headaches came first, but then other symptoms started piling up. I was exhausted all the time, even after sleeping for 9 or 10 hours. My stomach felt queasy most mornings, and I'd lost almost 15 pounds without trying. Some days I felt so dizzy I had to sit down in the middle of client meetings. Maybe you should see Dr. Harrison, David suggested one morning as I gripped the bathroom sink, waiting for another wave of nausea to pass. I'm sure it's just stress, I said, though I was starting to worry myself. Sarah, you're pale as a ghost, David said, his voice full of concern. And you barely ate any of the soup I made last night. Let me drive you to the doctor today. Dr. Harrison had been our family physician for years. He'd delivered Tommy, treated Michael's occasional back problems, and helped me through the worst of my grief after the accident. If anyone could figure out what was wrong with me, it would be him. Well, your blood pressure is a little low, Dr. Harrison said after examining me thoroughly. And you've definitely lost weight since your last visit. Tell me about your symptoms. I listed everything. The headaches, fatigue, nausea, dizziness, and the strange metallic taste in my mouth that had started a few weeks ago. Any major life changes recently? He asked. My boyfriend moved in about 2 months ago, I said. But that's been really positive. He's been taking care of everything so I can focus on work. Dr. Harrison nodded and ordered blood tests. Let's see what these tell us. In the meantime, I want you to take it easy. Maybe cut back on work hours if you can. The blood tests came back mostly normal, except for slightly elevated liver enzymes. Dr. Harrison said it could be stress-related or maybe a mild virus that was taking a long time to clear up. Sometimes grief can manifest in physical symptoms months or even years later, he explained. Your body has been through a lot of trauma. Try to get more rest, eat regular meals, and let's recheck these levels in a month. David was wonderful through all of this. He insisted on coming to every appointment, taking detailed notes about everything Dr. Harrison said. He'd ask intelligent questions about my medication options and treatment plans. You don't have to do all this, I told him after one particularly long appointment. Of course I do, he said, squeezing my hand. You'd do the same for me. We're a team now, Sarah. At home, David became even more attentive. He'd bring me herbal tea every morning and evening, saying the antioxidants would help boost my immune system. He made special soups and smoothies, claiming they were packed with vitamins and minerals my body needed. My grandmother swore by this recipe, he'd say, bringing me a steaming mug of something that tasted bitter despite the honey he added. It'll help you get your strength back. But I wasn't getting stronger. If anything, I was getting worse. There were days when I could barely concentrate during important business meetings. I'd forget clients' names, lose track of conversations, and sometimes feel so confused I couldn't remember which properties I was supposed to show. Maybe you should consider taking a step back from the business, David suggested one evening as I struggled to review contracts at the kitchen table. Just temporarily, until you feel better. I can't do that, I said, rubbing my temples. The business is everything Michael and I built together. It's Tommy's future. And what good is Tommy's future if something happens to you? David asked gently. Sarah, you're pushing yourself too hard. Maybe I could help more with the administrative stuff. I'm good with numbers and paperwork. The idea terrified me, but David was making sense. I was making mistakes, missing important details, and probably hurting the business more than helping it in my current condition. Just the paperwork, I said finally. Nothing involving client relationships or major decisions. Of course, David agreed immediately. Whatever you're comfortable with. I just want to help. That night, I fell asleep on the couch while David was cleaning up dinner dishes. When I woke up the next morning, I was in my bed with no memory of how I got there. David said he'd carried me upstairs after I'd fallen into such a deep sleep he couldn't wake me. You were exhausted, sweetheart, he said, bringing me my morning tea. Your body is telling you to rest. But even with more rest, I kept getting sicker. The first time Tommy saw something he shouldn't have, he wasn't even looking for it. He was just playing hide-and-seek with his friend Jake from next door, and he'd found the perfect hiding spot in our garage behind the old Christmas decorations. That's when he spotted David doing something strange. Tommy told me about it weeks later, after everything came out, but at the time, he was too scared and confused to say anything. He watched David through a crack between two storage boxes as David pulled out a small notebook and wrote something down. Then David opened a plastic bag and carefully measured white powder onto a tiny spoon. My 8-year-old son didn't understand what he was seeing, but he knew it looked wrong. David kept checking over his shoulder like he was worried someone might catch him. Then he folded the powder into a piece of paper and put it in his pocket. Tommy stayed hidden until David left the garage. Then he snuck out and ran back into the house. But he couldn't stop thinking about what he'd seen. Over the next few days, Tommy started watching David more carefully. He noticed that David always insisted on making my morning coffee and evening tea. He saw David stirring things into my soup when he thought no one was looking. And Tommy started to put the pieces together in the way that only children can, without overthinking, just trusting what his eyes were telling him. The day Tommy found David's hiding spot changed everything for both of us. I was at work, showing a house to potential buyers, when Tommy got home from school. David was supposed to pick him up, but Tommy's teacher had let him walk home with friends instead. David didn't know Tommy was in the house. Tommy went to the garage to get his bike, and that's when he decided to investigate the corner where he'd seen David acting suspicious. Behind a stack of old paint cans, Tommy found a small cardboard box. Inside the box was David's notebook. Tommy couldn't read all the words. Some were too big for a second grader, but he could read enough. He saw my name written over and over again. He saw dates and numbers. He saw words like weak and sick and tired. There were also several small bottles with labels that had been scratched off and plastic bags with different colored powders. Tommy took one of the bottles and one of the plastic bags and hid them in his backpack. Then he carefully put everything else back exactly how he'd found it. That night, Tommy tried to tell me what he'd discovered, but I was having one of my bad days. My head was pounding and I felt so nauseous I could barely sit up straight. When Tommy tried to show me the bottle he'd taken, I barely glanced at it. "Not now, sweetheart," I said, closing my eyes. "Mommy doesn't feel good." David appeared with my evening tea as he always did. "What's wrong, buddy?" he asked Tommy with his usual friendly smile. Tommy quickly shoved the bottle back into his backpack. "Nothing," he mumbled. But David's eyes had gotten sharp, and Tommy noticed. From that night on, David started paying much more attention to Tommy's comings and goings. He'd ask where Tommy had been after school, what he'd been doing in his room, whether he'd been playing in the garage. "Just keeping track of our boy," David would tell me with a laugh when I mentioned that he seemed to be questioning Tommy a lot. Kids can get into trouble if they're not supervised properly. Tommy became quieter around David after that. He stopped joining us for the science experiments David liked to do in the garage. He started spending more time in his room, and when I asked him why, he just said he had homework to do. One evening, I found Tommy standing outside the kitchen door, listening to David talk on the phone. When I asked him what he was doing, Tommy looked scared. "Mom," he whispered. David was talking to someone about finishing something this week, and he said something about a kid being suspicious. I thought Tommy was just being imaginative, maybe feeling left out or jealous of the attention I was giving David. Kids sometimes made up stories when they felt their parents' focus was elsewhere. "David loves you, Tommy," I told my son. "He's just trying to take care of both of us." But Tommy shook his head. "Mom, I don't think David is who you think he is." Looking back now, I realized Tommy had been trying to protect me for weeks. He'd been watching, gathering evidence, and trying to find a way to warn me that the man I trusted was slowly destroying our lives. My 8-year-old son was the only one who saw the truth while I was too sick and too trusting to recognize what was happening right in front of me. The week David decided to make his final move, I was sicker than I'd ever been in my life. I could barely get through a full workday without needing to rest, and even simple conversations left me exhausted and confused. My hands shook constantly, and I'd started losing chunks of time, sometimes forgetting entire conversations or waking up with no memory of how I'd gotten to bed. David suggested I see Dr. Harrison again, but this time he had a different concern. "Sarah, I think we need to talk about updating your will," he said one morning as I struggled to keep my coffee down. I know it's not pleasant to think about, but with your health problems getting worse? The thought hadn't even occurred to me. Michael and I had drawn up basic wills years ago, leaving everything to each other and then to Tommy. After Michael died, I'd been too overwhelmed to think about updating anything. I don't want to pressure you, David continued, sitting down beside me and taking my shaking hand. But if something happened to you, what would happen to Tommy? Who would take care of him? Who would manage the business? The questions hit me like ice water. Tommy would go to my sister in California, according to the old will, but she had 3 kids of her own and barely knew my son. The business would probably have to be sold, and Tommy's future security would disappear. I've been thinking about this a lot, David said gently. And I know we haven't been together very long, but I love you and Tommy like you're my own family. If you're comfortable with it, maybe we should make some legal arrangements, just to protect Tommy's future. Over the next few days, David brought up the subject repeatedly. He'd found a lawyer who could draw up new documents quickly. He researched guardianship laws and life insurance policies. He even looked into trust funds that would protect Tommy's inheritance. You're so sick, sweetheart, he'd say, stroking my hair when I was too weak to get out of bed. I just want to make sure you have peace of mind. You shouldn't have to worry about Tommy's future when you're trying to get better. The lawyer David found was efficient and professional. She explained everything carefully, though my foggy brain had trouble following all the legal language. The new will would make David Tommy's guardian and give him control of the business until Tommy turned 18. There was also a life insurance policy that would pay off the house and provide additional security. This is very generous of Mr. Chen, the lawyer noted. Taking on responsibility for a child and a business is a significant commitment. David squeezed my hand. Sarah and Tommy are my family now, he said. I'd do anything for them. I signed the papers on a Thursday afternoon, my signature shaky but legal. David witnessed everything and made copies for his own records. There, he said, kissing my forehead. Now you can focus on getting well without worrying about anything else. That evening, David seemed happier than I'd seen him in weeks. He hummed while cooking dinner and kept checking his phone, smiling at whatever messages he was receiving. Good news? I asked weakly from the couch. Just work stuff, he said. A teaching opportunity might be opening up in another district. Better pay, more stable hours. Something about his tone made me uncomfortable, but I was too tired to think about it clearly. David insisted on making a special dinner that night. My favorite chicken and rice, though I couldn't remember ever telling him it was my favorite. He also announced he had a surprise for dessert. I'm making you a chocolate cake, he said proudly, from scratch, just like my grandmother used to make. It's going to help you feel so much better. I tried to tell him I wasn't hungry, that my stomach couldn't handle rich food, but David was already pulling ingredients from the pantry. Trust me, he said, his back turned to me as he measured flour and sugar. This recipe is special. It's exactly what you need right now. While David baked, I dozed fitfully on the couch. I kept hearing him talking on the phone in low voices, though he'd stop whenever I stirred. Tommy was unusually quiet, staying in his room even when David called him for dinner. He's probably just tired from school, David said when I mentioned Tommy's absence. Growing boys need their rest. But when Tommy finally came downstairs for dinner, he looked pale and scared. He picked at his food and kept glancing between David and me with worried eyes. Everything okay, buddy? David asked, his voice cheerful but his eyes watchful. Tommy nodded quickly but didn't speak. The cake David made was beautiful, 3 perfect layers with rich chocolate frosting. He'd even written, "Get well soon, Sarah," in elegant script across the top. This looks amazing, I said, though the sight of all that sweetness made my stomach turn. It's going to make you feel like a new person, David promised, cutting generous slices for all of us. I guarantee it. In Tommy's bedroom, with that plastic bag of white powder in my trembling hands, everything suddenly became crystal clear. The fog that had been clouding my mind for months lifted just enough for me to understand the horrible truth. David had been poisoning me slowly, systematically, waiting for the perfect moment to finish what he'd started. "Tommy," I whispered, pulling my son close to me. "Tell me everything you know. Everything." With tears streaming down his face, Tommy opened his backpack and pulled out David's notebook. The pages were filled with dates, dosages, and observations about my declining health. I saw my name written over and over again, followed by words that made my blood run cold. Weaker today. Memory issues increasing. Ready for final phase. But it was the phone number written on the back page that made everything click into place. Next to it, David had written, "Lisa, split 50-50 after." "Tommy, have you ever heard David mention someone named Lisa?" I asked. Tommy nodded. "He talks to her on the phone sometimes when he thinks I'm not listening. He always goes outside or to the garage when she calls." My hands shook as I flipped through more pages of the notebook. David had been tracking my symptoms like a scientist monitoring an experiment. He'd calculated exactly how much poison my body could handle before I'd become suspicious. And he'd been building up to tonight. The night he'd give me enough to finish the job. "Mom, there's more," Tommy whispered, pulling out his phone. "I recorded him yesterday when he didn't know I was home." Tommy had learned to use the voice recorder app on his phone, and what I heard made my stomach drop to the floor. David's voice, clear and cold, talking to someone named Lisa. "Tomorrow night," he was saying. "The cake will have enough to make it look like her heart just gave out. All that stress from being sick for months, very believable. And I've got legal guardianship of the kid and control of the business. We can be out of state by the weekend." Lisa's voice was harder to hear, but I caught enough. "What about the boy? He's been watching you." "Kids don't make reliable witnesses," David replied with a laugh that chilled me to the bone. "And once his mother is gone, he'll have no choice but to accept me as his guardian. A few months in therapy to deal with his grief, and he'll forget he ever suspected anything." The recording continued with David and Lisa making plans to sell my business, liquidate my assets, and disappear to start a new life together. They talked about my death like it was a minor inconvenience they had to handle before their real life could begin. "Sarah," David's voice called from downstairs, much louder now. "Come on, the cake is perfect. Tommy, bring your mom down here right now." I looked at my son, my brave, observant, protective son who had been trying to save my life for weeks while I was too sick and trusting to listen. "Tommy, I need you to do exactly what I tell you," I said, my voice stronger than it had been in months. "We're going to get out of here, but we have to be smart about it." I grabbed my purse and car keys from my dresser. Tommy stuffed the evidence back into his backpack, and I helped him climb out his bedroom window onto the small roof over our back porch. We'd practiced this escape route years ago during fire safety lessons, never imagining we'd need it to escape a murderer living in our own home. As we climbed down from the roof, I could hear David getting angry inside the house. "Sarah, where are you? The cake is getting cold. I worked so hard on this." We made it to my car just as David appeared at Tommy's bedroom window. His face changed completely when he saw us, the mask of caring boyfriend disappearing to reveal something cold and calculating underneath. "Sarah, wait!" he called out, but we were already backing out of the driveway. As I drove toward the police station with shaking hands, Tommy reached over and squeezed my arm. "Mom," he said quietly, "I was so scared you were going to eat that cake." "You saved my life, sweetheart," I told him, tears streaming down my face. "You saved both our lives." Behind us, David was probably realizing that his perfect plan had just crumbled, thanks to an 8-year-old boy who loved his mother enough to pay attention when nobody else would. The man I'd trusted with my heart, my home, and my son's future had been planning to murder me for money. But Tommy's courage and love had given us both a chance to escape and start over. This time, I'd be much more careful about who I let into our lives.